What if I told you that a man already convicted of federal fraud, a man currently on federal release, could steal over $250 million from the government? And what if I told you he did it in less than a year? It sounds like the plot of a movie, right? But this is the very real story of Paul Richard Randall. He's 66 years old, and he has now pleaded guilty to major federal fraud charges not once, but twice in his life. Today we're diving into the sheer audacity of his latest crime, a $269 million Medi-Cal fraud, and he orchestrated the entire thing from a tiny, unassuming pharmacy in a California strip mall. The charges against him are a laundry list of criminal ambition: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, substantive wire fraud, money laundering, and, this is the kicker, committing all of these offences while he was already on federal release for a previous crime. Randall didn't act alone. He conspired with a pharmacy owner, a nurse practitioner, and a network of patient marketers to turn Medi-Cal, California's healthcare program for its most vulnerable citizens, into his own personal billing machine. In his guilty plea, he admitted to submitting a staggering $269,120,829 in false claims. And before the scheme collapsed, the state had already paid out $178,746,556. The government has managed to claw some of it back, seizing about $126.5 million in assets so far. But the story of how he did it, and how he almost got away with it again, is just incredible. To really understand the audacity of Paul Randall, you have to go back in time. Let's rewind to April of 2012. This is when he first pleaded guilty to federal fraud. It was part of a massive FBI investigation in Southern California nicknamed, and you can't make this up, Operation Spinal Cap. The scheme was as widespread as it was corrupt. It involved doctors being paid illegal kickbacks to refer injured workers for spinal surgeries, often completely unnecessary surgeries, at two specific hospitals, Pacific Hospital of Long Beach and Tri-City Regional Medical Center. And Paul Randall's role in all of this? Oh, he was central. He was the connector, the guy who made it all happen. He recruited the doctors, he managed the relationships, and he coordinated the kickbacks. We're talking about payouts of up to $20,000 per surgery referral, just for sending a patient their way. All told, Operation Spinal Cap billed for $580 million, and the system paid out $226 million. For his part in this massive fraud, Randall decided to cooperate with the government. He named names, and for that, he was sentenced to just 15 months in prison. For most people, a 15-month federal prison sentence would be a wake-up call, a sign to, maybe change your ways. But for Paul Randall, it seems it was merely an intermission, because Paul Randall is not most people. Fast forward to January 2020. He's out, he's back in the world, and he finds himself in trouble. Again. This time he's charged with tax evasion. But when you look at the underlying conduct, the reason he was evading taxes, it's eerily familiar. He was running another prescription referral business. The model was basically the same as his new scheme. He had marketers out there collecting patient information, and he had doctors being paid to write prescriptions for these really expensive compounded drugs, which were then billed to insurance. So he gets arrested for this, and he's released on bond with one very clear, very simple condition. Do not commit another crime while on release. Seems straightforward enough, right? In April of 2022, he pleads guilty to that tax evasion charge. Now listen closely, because this next part is the most shocking piece of the entire story. That very same month, the same month he is standing in a court, pleading guilty to a federal crime, while he is out on bond and awaiting his sentencing, Paul Randall begins orchestrating the biggest, most brazen fraud scheme of his entire life. He was eventually sentenced for the tax evasion in April 2023. He got 23 months, but by then his new $250 million Medi-Cal scheme had already been running full steam ahead for 11 months. The audacity is just breathtaking. So how did he do it? How did one man, on federal release, manage to pull in hundreds of millions of dollars so quickly? Well, Randall's latest scheme exploited a critical, temporary vulnerability in the healthcare system. In early 2022, California's Medi-Cal program was in the middle of a huge transition. It was moving its prescription drug payment system over to a new platform called Medi-Cal RX, And to make sure patients didn't lose access to their medications during this changeover, the state made a fateful decision. They temporarily suspended the prior authorization requirement. Now, prior authorization is a vital safeguard. It's basically a checkpoint. It means that for certain expensive or unusual drugs, a doctor has to get approval from the insurance program. In this case, Medi-Cal. Before the prescription is filled, it's a way to ensure that the medication is actually medically necessary before the government pays for it. With that safeguard gone, as prosecutors later said, the gate was wide open. Randall didn't just stumble upon this, he targeted it. Specifically, he went after what are called non-contracted generic drugs. This is a bit of a technical term, but it's key to the whole scheme. Think of it like this. They would take cheap, common ingredients and repackage them into very specific dosages or combinations. These new formulations weren't on Medi-Cal's standard approved list, which meant they triggered massive reimbursements. Normally, a drug like this would absolutely require prior authorization, and it would almost certainly be denied. But with the gate open, the claims just sailed right through. Let me give you a couple of examples because this is where it gets truly insane. One of the drugs they used was meloxicam. It's a generic anti-inflammatory, kind of like a prescription-strength Advil. A standard prescription for meloxicam costs about $13. Through Randall's scheme, they were billing it at over $13,000 per prescription, from $13,000 to $13,000. Another one was folate tablets. It's a common vitamin, a form of folic acid. They were billing for thousands of dollars per claim. This temporary administrative measure, this thing that was designed to help patients access care during a system transition, had just become Paul Randall's personal goldmine. In March of 2022, with the gate to the Treasury wide open, Randall went looking for a partner. He approached a man named Carlos Medi-Cal, the owner of a small pharmacy called Monte Vista Pharmacy in Montclair, California. They ran a test. They submitted a claim for one of these specific high reimbursement medications. The system paid out approximately $6,000. It worked. Immediately after that successful test, Randall laid out his offer to Medi-Cal. I will build you a pipeline of these prescriptions, and all I want is a 40% cut of the profit. Medi-Cal agreed, and just like that, the fraud machine was born. Randall quickly built out his network. He had patient marketers who would go to job fairs and community events, just collecting names and Medi-Cal ID numbers from unsuspecting people. He then recruited a nurse practitioner named Patricia Anderson. She was paid kickbacks to sign stacks of pre-filled prescriptions. She never saw a single patient. She never reviewed a single medical record. She never made any determination of medical necessity. Randall's team would just fill out the forms. Anderson would sign them and fax them over to Monte Vista. And the pharmacy would bill Medi-Cal for astronomical sums. The numbers tell the whole story. Let's look at Monte Vista Pharmacy's books. In December of 2021, before the scheme started, the pharmacy billed Medi-Cal for about $31,000 and was paid $10,600. Pretty normal for a small neighbourhood pharmacy. Now let's jump forward 1 year to December of 2022, right in the middle of Randall's scheme. In that single month, Monte Vista Pharmacy billed Medi-Cal for $73 million and was paid $48 million. In 1 month, that is a 23,000% increase in billing in just 12 months. It's a number so big it almost sounds fake. The scheme ran for just 11 months, from May 2022 through April 2023. In that short time, they billed over $269 million and got paid over $178 million. A fraud this massive, this fast, couldn't stay hidden forever. It was just too loud. It started raising red flags almost immediately. By July of 2022, just a couple of months in, state officials had already flagged Monte Vista as a high-risk provider. They noted that a shocking 90% of the patients being billed had no prior history of ever using the drugs they were supposedly being prescribed. Then, in November of 2022, the California Department of Healthcare Services decided to conduct an unannounced audit. Investigators showed up at the pharmacy, and this is where things start to unravel like a cheap sweater. During the audit, the pharmacy owner Medi-Cal was observed making frequent panicked phone calls. He was seen relaying the auditor's questions to someone on the other end of the line, An investigator got a quick look at his phone and saw the caller ID, Paul Randall. When they asked Medi-Cal who he was talking to, he claimed it was his father. But phone records don't lie. They later showed there were 30 calls and 71 text messages between Medi-Cal and Randall during that 2-day audit. Former employees started talking. They corroborated Randall's constant presence at the pharmacy, describing an older, bald white man named Paul, who always drove a black Tesla and who would have these long private meetings with Medi-Cal. They even said that a list of the fraud scheme medications had been hanging on the wall, but someone took it down right before the inspectors arrived. Meanwhile, the pharmacy's phone was ringing off the hook. It was patient after patient, all complaining. They were receiving medications they never asked for, from a doctor they'd never heard of, for conditions they didn't even have. The final piece of the puzzle snapped into place when investigators located a black Tesla, registered to Randall's son, right at Randall's residence. They got a warrant. And inside that car they found the motherlode, Wells Fargo debit cards connected to Randall's trust accounts, pre-signed blank checks, and most importantly, detailed spreadsheets. It was, as prosecutors described it, the entire blueprint of the $250 million fraud. It listed patient names, the medications, the quantities, the exact reimbursement amounts, and the billing status for every single fraudulent claim. It was all right there in a Tesla, in his driveway. So what happened to the $178 million? Well, the grand jury was unequivocal about it. The massive payments Randall received were not legitimate business income. They were illegal kickbacks. Between May of 2022 and November of 2023, the pharmacy owner, Medi-Cal, and his family members paid Paul Randall at least $32 million in proceeds from the fraud. The money would move from Monte Vista's accounts directly into trust accounts that Randall controlled, often in 7-figure wire transfers. And they were so brazen about it. They would write consulting services on the memo line, as if that could possibly explain the flow of millions of dollars. Randall also made sure to pay his co-conspirators. He paid nurse practitioner Patricia Anderson at least $285,500 in kickbacks for all those prescriptions she rubber-stamped. And to try and hide it, he routed those payments through his attorney's client trust accounts and the law firm itself, trying to obscure the transfers. And with his illicit gains, Randall built an empire of stolen wealth. He went on a shopping spree. He purchased 9 different real estate properties across Southern California, in places like Laguna Hills, Aliso Viejo, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, Long Beach, and Orange. He bought 9 luxury vehicles. And, in a slightly bizarre twist, he spent more than $1 million on sports memorabilia. As I mentioned, the government has seized about $126.5 million in assets, and they are still working to trace the rest of the money. When you lay it all out, Paul Richard Randall's criminal history reveals a chilling pattern. This isn't a series of mistakes. This is a career. Let's just walk through the timeline plainly. In 2012, he gets his first fraud conviction, gets 15 months because he cooperates. In 2020, he's charged with tax evasion while he's still on release from that first case. In 2022, he pleads guilty to the tax evasion, and in that same month, a month where he should be contemplating his future in prison, he instead launches the $269 million Medi-Cal fraud, all while awaiting sentencing. In 2023, he's finally sentenced to 23 months for the tax evasion, but his big Medi-Cal scheme has already been running for 11 months and has already siphoned off over $100 million. Finally, he's arrested on federal charges for the Medi-Cal scheme, and in 2026, he pleads guilty to wire fraud committed while on federal release. He is now facing 30 years in federal prison. This wasn't just a crime of opportunity. This was a system. Find a gap in the system, exploit it, scale it up as fast as possible, and then move on to the next one, each time bigger than the last. The federal prosecutors were direct and blunt. First Assistant U.S. Attorney Bill Asaley said, quote, "This defendant used a public health program as his personal piggy bank. And this case hits every single federal enforcement priority. He's a repeat offender, it's a massive dollar loss, it's the abuse of a public safety net program, and the crimes were committed while he was already under federal supervision. The program that Randall defrauded, Medi-Cal, serves 15 million Californians. Low-income families, seniors, people with disabilities, children. $178 million walked out of a program that was built for people who have nothing. Paul Richard Randall's journey, from his first fraud conviction in 2012 through a second prescription scheme to orchestrating a $269 million operation while on federal release, it just paints this stark picture of a true career criminal. He was on federal release that entire time, buying luxury properties and sports memorabilia with money stolen from taxpayers. The medications that were billed in the names of vulnerable Californians were often sent to people who never asked for them, never saw a doctor, and never needed them, which is why the pharmacy's phone was ringing off the hook with complaints. As prosecutors emphasized, this was not a loophole. It was a business model of fraud. And now at 66 years old, Paul Richard Randall is facing the consequence of that business model. 30 years in federal prison. It's a stark end for his repeated, escalating exploitation of the very systems designed to help people. And it's a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance against those who would fleece taxpayers and abuse programs designed to help the most vulnerable among us. For the Underground Files, I'm the Clark. If this episode hit, share it with somebody. One share puts this in front of people who need to hear it. Subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating if you are feeling generous. 5 stars helps more people find the files. New episodes dropping every week. Stay skeptical, stay curious, and we will see you in the next file.